ready to go? Okay, we're back on the record. I want to apologize to Janice Sargis, our staff member. I don't know what I said, missed something, or there was some Reese or something. I mangled your name for some reason. I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, I know. Janice, but anyway, sorry about that, Janice. Okay, we're back on. Again, just to summarize what happened in the morning session, we have narrowed our, or at least the committee has recommended, I should say, that 4 of the 9 applicants that were in the Voting Rights Act attorney pool be advanced for an interview on Thursday, and we'll conduct those interviews. I don't know if, Mr. Miller, did you have any updates in terms of contacting them?
I do. I made the 4 phone calls. No one I spoke to was unhappy to get the call.
Okay, good.
The California firms will both be present on Thursday to make presentations. I was not able to speak with Gilda Daniels. I left her a long message and sent an email, and hopefully she'll respond during our meeting this afternoon. I also spoke with Bruce Adelson at Federal Compliance Consulting. He has been struggling with a conflict for Thursday and is not able to come to the meeting. I just spoke with Kevin to see if the commission wishes, they would like to speak with him by phone, and I'm advised that that technology exists even in the California legislature to receive a phone call if you would like to proceed on that basis.
And that would be fully compliant with Bagley Keene.
Yeah, it is. We would have a challenge if a commissioner
Right.
was in a different location, but he would be able to call in.
Okay. Okay.
I have a question. Is it possible, I know we have no internet connection here. I was thinking something like Skype so that at least there'd be some video.
I don't know the answer to that, although I'll just add that I think it might be difficult on his end. And I'll go out on a limb here without being invited. In the event you wish to do that, you might consider whether you would also want to do that with Gilda Daniels, as it would save a trip out here for her. Well,
Okay.
I don't know the Skype situation.
He's saying
Okay. No Skype.
Wouldn't be able to. Okay. Although I've been able to, at least on our laptops, I've been able to get some signal. I don't know if that's. I mean, the problem, of course, is projection on a large enough screen and those kinds of things. But
Yeah, I mean, if we have we're going to, at least one of us has a wireless card, right? So you ought to be able to, somebody will have a card that we could use on Thursday, and all we would need is a monitor.
Are we in this space?
no, not for the full meeting, or not for the Thursday meeting. I don't
Thursday,
think.
we're.
Yeah, where are we?
Could go back downstairs.
Right now,
No.
you're scheduled, the agenda's scheduled you in 447, which is back up on the
Oh, right.
Okay.
even up that extra set of
Right,
stairs.
right.
But you could switch out with the Outreach Advisory Committee, which is in room 113, which is on the first floor of the restored part of the Capitol. So.
The reason for that is that the second room is on the Senate side, and Kevin advises that they have that capacity, and I believe be able to help us with setting up the phone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we could make those arrangements, that'd be great.
Maybe the Senate Pro Tem President, like his office is available.
Okay. Well, if you could, Mr. Miller, if you could get in touch with, before we proceed, maybe we should have some discussion about that, whether we're feeling that our 2 out-of-state applicants, if we're feeling that's okay to do, which is to have at least minimally a telephone conversation, but have a Skype or basically a teleconferencing option versus a live interview. Any thoughts on that?
This is up to the committee, but I don't personally feel like you need to enforce having, a teleconferencing option for both if we do it for one.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
That's
Because
fine.
I think there's a lot that's most communication, as you know, is not verbal, so.
No.
And are there any objections to actually doing it by telephone, though? In other words, would anybody require that an applicant be here for a live interview versus a telephone or Skype interview?
I mean, I would prefer they be live, but I'm not going to rule somebody out because they can't get here. But, we can ask the questions. I'd like to see the body language, but, if that's not possible, it's
Certainly.
not possible.
Other thoughts? Any opposition to telephonic interviewing? Oh, I'm sorry, Janice, could you turn your, oh, thank you. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to suggest that, it might be useful for this committee to be able to try to see, to go ahead and try to set up a Skype
Okay.
thing.
Just in terms of,
If you can.
Are we back in session?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just,
We've been in session,
I wasn't sure if don't we have to do public?
well,
But you have to make
At
record.
some point.
oh, yeah, no, I
Yeah.
think we're,
Yeah.
I think I was in the middle of summarizing what we're doing, but
Okay.
to get a sense of,
Okay.
because, and I have a report back from the staff regarding, this is still in the middle of the report regarding availability of candidates, so I think we can continue that discussion before continuing with public comment. Anyway, but so, I mean, I guess the preference again is for sort of visual as well, so we get sort of body language and get to know the name and the face together, so I would certainly support that, assuming our candidates, and I'm assuming our candidates can make arrangements, because that's fairly standard technology.
Yeah, I would hope that he would. I just want to report to the commission, though, that he was between clients and would be coming off an airplane at the time that we would be wanting him to speak. So I just don't want to commit his capability at the other end.
Sure. Okay.
So, I'm sorry, so just, he would be doing this interview under those conditions, literally in an airport or something somewhere on his cell phone?
I think that's possible. I don't want to speak with the limits of his capability, but that could be the worst case, and that is possible.
Okay.
just for clarification, is it, I know that you have to actually schedule these 4 interviews, so that would, all 4 interview slots, that would be the case?
Yes, the day gets better late in our day for him.
Okay, so we could put them last.
Yes, it would be helpful to put him last.
Okay. And Professor Daniels, you haven't had any direct contact with her yet?
Correct.
Okay. Well, we could ask staff to just keep us apprised of what's going on, but go ahead and go with scheduling those interviews at this point. And if we need to make some adjustments on Thursday, or we have to push something back, we may have to do that, but let's just go forward then.
At this point, we were going to request a in-person, though, with Gilda, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Okay. So again, just to summarize, the 4 applicants that we're advancing are Federal Compliance Consulting, GRD Consulting, Nielsen, Merksamer, Paranello, Gross, and Leone, and Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher. Okay. Let me just open it for public comments if there are any. What we're going to be moving into is a discussion of the interview process on Thursday, questions we might ask, concerns, as well as issues regarding scope of work and cost. And again, Commissioner Dye is a liaison with the Budget Committee. We're very happy to have her here for that discussion. Are there any public comments at this time, either on the report back regarding the 4 applicants or as we move forward on the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Let's talk about that then. So, I mean, it seems to me we've got some, and a lot of these criteria we've been going through anyway in terms of just sort of reinforcing things, but, and we've obviously raised a number of concerns about specific applicants. I did, in discussions with staff, I did raise a number of points regarding rather specific questions around some of the recent and major cases on the Voting Rights Act, and where I think the level of detail, I think, needs to be expanded a bit more. So that, in terms of sort of general questions I might ask everybody, those are sort of things I was thinking about. And they can certainly, I would like them to elaborate a little bit more on some of the recent cases, for example, if they want to highlight a few. I mean, do other folks have any sort of, again, questions that we might ask all of the applicants?
Yeah, I think if we follow the kind of procedure that we've used in the past when interviewing staff, we come up with a set of standard questions that we ask everyone, and then you can refer to their specifics in their applications to ask others.
So just in the past, since I more recently joined the commission, have you sort of written all that out ahead of time? Or okay. So, sounds like a good procedure then. Does anyone want to, shall we rely on Janice to sort of help us with our note keeping on this? Okay. I'm personally terrible at this kind of thing. I'm happy to defer to the better note takers.
I mean, I think we should ask them a specific question on their capacity to respond, because everybody has that issue in one form or another. I think that to talk again, bring up the more recent cases, and just this first column, their experience and the VRA experience, to tell them more, elaborate more, and not only that, ask them an open-ended question to the effect of, this is the way the law is. What do you think are going to be our pitfalls, and how do you think you can help us avoid them?
Sure.
I mean, again, that also helps us educate us at the
Yeah,
same time.
I think that's important.
That's right.
Right.
That's very important.
So those are a couple of standard questions I would ask.
Other commissioners want to? As long as setting up a computer, or making sure a computer doesn't die on her. So it's very important in our electronic age. Battery power is very important, or at least some live current is important.
So legal questions about potential problems they might see. What do they think are the most important cases that we have to
Right.
deal
What's the
with?
status of the law, kind of thing.
That are relevant for us.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly concerned, and I think this doesn't have to be all done in the interview, but there are a lot of questions regarding the compliance with the Act that I'm concerned about. That I think at some point we will like to have some clarity from the council, and among these include, the appropriate population to look at for Section 2 compliance. Because there's a question about when you look at the majority population, is it just voting age population, or is it citizen voting age population? It's not entirely clear.
Or is it resident voting age or resident population, as opposed to
total population?
Total population.
Yeah, I think normally it's been voting age minimally, but there's some question. There've been some cases, and there's a bit of mixed case law regarding whether it should be citizen
right.
voting age population.
Right.
And again, maybe simply that's an ambiguity that they'll, and they should know the ambiguity. Actually, that's actually a good question. In terms of they're knowing the current state of the law. So that's one example where I'd like them to sort of flesh out their opinions on that area. Not that it has to be dispositive. Another example.
Just on that, instead of leading them exactly on what we want to know, I do kind of want to keep it open-ended on some things, which there's this issue that for the first time the census doesn't have CVAP.
The census, yeah, right.
Doesn't have
the annual census, right?
And it's
right,
the first
right.
time we've always had it when we've done this, and so we're now relying on. We will be relying on the community survey, American Community Survey, which is actually 5 years put together, or 3. I can't remember.
Depends on the jurisdiction.
Yeah, and then it's I can't remember if it's a mean or an average. But there are a lot of concerns about the accuracy of that because it goes way back. I mean, because some of those are early years, and there's been a big shift, and because we don't know what it is now because the census didn't track it, it could be a substantial difference between what we think the census would have shown and what the American Community Survey shows. And I would like to actually find out if they know about the issue without asking them, because I think if you're
Well,
gonna, yeah.
we've just telegraphed it.
But, yeah, that's true. Maybe they won't
So maybe I
watch.
should just shut up about this thing.
That's true.
But there are
But anyway.
there are some gray areas
Yeah.
that we may want to
Yeah,
ask some of that.
that's true.
That's being one of them. But I have a number of other ones too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, why don't we focus on what the open-ended question
Yeah.
is,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then
yeah,
we can see what issues are.
yeah. So any questions around who's the relevant population?
Yeah, that's sort of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and again, without telegraphing too much, there's questions about
Well, that's
the size. Again, recent cases. What are the implications of certain cases regarding these requirements that we've seen for many years under federal case law? So I think I don't know. I could get more specific now, or I can get more specific later.
No, I think open-ended is good. I mean, I would like to see a question about their methodology in working with the commission to minimize their expenses, but maximize the value of their advice to us in the time that we have.
Yeah.
So I'd like to hear about what their thinking is on what their work plan would be. I mean, if we hired you tomorrow, what you know, what would you do?
So is there a sense that we should not that it has to be a requirement, but should we in fact ask them to at least outline a basic work plan? They don't have to give a written plan. But, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Present in writing or just verbally?
I mean, I think you should include, for example, the split among the teams. Some of them went into some detail on that in terms of hours, but,
Yeah.
you know, what is their approach? I saw, I think in only really one of the applicants, a real discussion about methodology, and I'd like to, you know, understand what the approach would be from other candidates.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. And I think we are looking for folks who have had a lot of experience on redistricting. And even though this is a new procedure, or new set of procedures that we're following as a commission, that we could get some lessons from, or get some idea of how they see an ideal redistricting strategy unfolding, and what the role of that attorney should be. So I think that's a very good set of questions.
How do we get at this issue that I know we've talked about a little bit in the past, which is, you know, whether they come from a philosophy of complete risk aversion versus, you know, being expansive but still within the law, you know? And so, I mean, how do you?
You could ask that.
Yeah, I think
You could
that's a great
explicit.
question.
You could ask it
It's
explicitly.
what's your philosophy about, you know, balancing compliance with, you know, assuring that the commission, you know, whatever, meets its objectives or something.
Well, that's why
something
I'm
like.
asking, because it's a, you know, it's,
Kirk, you can help us with this one.
I think your suggestion's a good one, and another way to approach it would be how would you work with a public body counseling on gray areas of the law?
There you go.
right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
how would you work, or what?
Well, advise, but in a sense, I think it is a collaborative process and interaction. But counsel is probably the better term.
Mr. Ward?
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Blanco's, I was kind of thinking along the same way. I was trying to, again, not having a complete or expert understanding of the case laws, but just wondering how, asking them maybe what their perception of their most contentious VRA case was, why, and how did they, handle that or advise on that. Kind of a similar question that we've asked of past staff to try to understand, how they tackle contentious or to try to figure that kind of methodology or where they fall in that risk category.
Other points? I mean, I have a whole bunch of questions around how we look at cost specifically, but other thoughts at this point?
I'd like to suggest to the commission, kind of thinking ahead, it would be appropriate to inquire specifically about appellate experience, recognizing that this matter goes directly to the California Supreme Court in the event there is litigation. And you don't have to decide now whether you want to use the same counsel, but often that's a good practice, particularly if you can team a sense of confidence that you have the right appellate lawyer also working on the underlying matter.
Well, that raises a question for me, because I understand under the Act that the California Supreme Court has exclusive jurisdiction, but I thought that would only apply to state-based claims, so that if there were a federal Voting Rights Act claim, that would still be able to go to federal court, because the states can't limit a federal cause of action or a federal constitutional claim.
I've had the same question, and perhaps that's an excellent question to ask the lawyers.
Yeah.
But it just doubles the breadth of the question, really, because you would like to find capacity both at the trial level in the event that's available and before the Supreme Court.
And it's possible we'll be in multiple jurisdictions.
Oh, yeah, and I think that
if there are challenges that are based on state redistricting criteria and not on federal claims, we'd be in state. And then we'd be.
Right. And even if Mr. Miller and all of us agree that they can't go to federal court, that doesn't prevent somebody from actually suing in federal court. But I think the point is well taken. I think we should look for how do you look at appellate advocacy? How do you look at federal litigation if it's going to come up? So it's a very good point.
And I think along the same lines, I'd ask him the question, or her the question, how would you prepare for federal versus state litigation? I mean, is there something in the process that we should be aware of from day one?
Go ahead.
If I could, been thinking about this. A question about how they envision working with a technical consultant, I think, would be useful, in that that's a big part of this assignment.
So related to that, Mr. Miller, how did you? I think this was highlighted in at least one of the applications, but since you are chief counsel for the commission, how do you envision this council's interaction, both with you and any other staff that you have along with you, and the commission, other staff, and then also the commission directly, and in particular the legal committee? And do you see us funneling everything through you, or how do you see the working relationship going?
Well, I don't want to be in any way an impediment to access. At the same time, I do think we can be effective as a conduit and a coordinating function, as we're doing now, bringing on the Voting Rights Act Council as a new member of the team. And of course, there's flexibility. We should bake flexibility into the system. But a lot of it, I think, comes down to how we agenda items and tee them up for the commission's schedule going forward, when and where it'll be meeting for its business meetings, thinking about when VRA Council needs to be present. And of course, we're probably the most convenient to the commission. So I think it is very much a team exercise, and I would envision discussing matters with VRA Council on an ongoing basis, and then looking for the best way to respond to the commission as a whole or individually as appropriate on ongoing matters.
So one other thing that sort of comes to mind is, and we've had some discussion among staff, and I think at least on the technical committee, about a Voting Rights Act sort of statistician or sort of quantitative analyst who would be working with the VRA Council and with the Commission on some of the work that might need to be done in terms of racially polarized voting and other areas where there are some evidentiary requirements, to at least some basic requirements that you sort of at least look at. Whether I think part of what we have to figure out is how much data we really do need, and how much is essential to actually get our job done versus what someone might do if they were suing. We're not suing under Section 2, but so we don't have to meet that level of expert testimony and evidence. But we need to at least do our homework on it to make sure that we're safe in saying this is something where there could be a Section 2 violation. So I think one question we might ask the applicants is how do you envision working with what's your experience working with experts, and how do you envision experts, again, experts being statisticians, social scientists, maybe historians, individuals who might come in on a consulting basis to help with that type of analysis. And again, presumably everybody who's listed on litigation, and I'm sure the DOJ folks, former DOJ folks as well, have worked with experts before. So I think it'd be a good set of questions to ask them about how they envision the commission doing its work.
Yeah, and what level, it would be interesting to get their opinions on kind of what they think the level of our needs will be for racially polarized voting studies and things like that, too.
Yeah, in other words, not just asking with them what experience they have with experts, but really open-ended.
Yeah.
What experts do you think we will
Gonna
need?
Correct.
Yeah. Sort of on our for the public, sort of on our brainstorming.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
forgive the silence out there in the internet.
I've been trying to figure out, I don't know that we can do a hypothetical, but I think it kind of goes back to my question about the philosophy that the person or firm might use, which is what will be new to all of them will be the criteria that we have in the order that we have them. I mean, they've all worked with different pieces of this, compactness, contiguity, we assume they've all encountered different redistricting principles, but what will be novel for everybody, and which is what's exciting about and difficult about this task, is nobody's worked with the criteria we have rank ordered like we have it. So, there will be people that have done things where they look primarily at partisanship, and there will be people that look primarily at, compact districts where the overriding concern, et cetera. So I almost wish we could come up with a hypothetical, this is the law of Professor Mika, but a hypothetical that sort of asks them to apply the criteria that are in our statute in the order that they are in our statute. How would you, here's a scenario, how would you approach this? And that may be a little too many moving parts, but I
kind of like it.
It doesn't have to be too. It doesn't have to be too hypothetical either, because we do have our
We have some
criteria,
real
Yeah.
life
and they are
situation.
ranked. We can sort of present us, and we can think about it some more between now and then. But I could imagine some sort of hypothetical where you're asked to try to decide between. We got a couple of districts here, but we're trying to figure out. Well, we've got maybe Section 2 district here. Maybe it's we're dealing with some communities of interest here. There's a county boundary we're dealing with. How much you want to reconcile, or how do you see these multiple criteria? Obviously, we know the ranking. That's pretty clear. But how do you see trying to solve this problem given the hypo that we give them?
What would you say to the technical expert? In other words, what would you say to the technical expert that's drawing the lines?
Right.
in a sense.
And again, your primary role is of course advising us on Voting Rights Act issues, but how does that square with all the other things that we're having to consider at the same time?
Did we make a determination for how many open-ended questions we were looking to
Yeah,
ask?
oh, yeah.
And
I
if
think
so,
we'll
I think we're refining these.
What-
I want to go through the list again, and I think we're sort of more in the brainstorming
yeah.
mode right now, and I'd like to go through the questions again, and then just maybe change the order or adjust them, but anyway, go ahead.
and then I think I've heard two broad categories of questions so far, maybe I'm wrong. One is a capacity availability question, and methodology, is that or application?
work-
I think
methodology and
it's a
application?
combination. I was just sort of writing it out. I think it's a combination of analytical skills and And methodology.
Okay.
Because it's also, since everything's new, kind of what's their thought process?
Is there any other broad category of question? I mean, do we want to maybe list what categories we want to hit and then go back and brainstorm each category, or would that be more?
I'm also wondering, I mean, how we've done this in the past is that we were presented with a series of questions, and then we just chose a short list of them to ask as prepared questions, and we could invite Mr. Miller to help us refine these questions further now that we've
Staff.
given some direction.
Staff.
You know, about the kinds of issues that we want to tee up, and have him word the exact question and indicate whether we want a hypothetical, which I think is a great idea. I think it's a case-based kind of question is usually quite helpful to see how someone thinks.
I think when we've done that in the past, so we've provided general skill areas or areas that we want them to draft questions in.
Correct.
And so I'm wondering if maybe we should focus at this point at determining what those areas are.
Categories.
And then categories, and we could go ahead and any ideas we might have, list those, and then ask staff to.
Okay. Sounds like a good approach. Mr. Miller.
Just note if I could, the obvious, we haven't hit on our list yet the conflicts question,
Right.
which
Yeah,
we
yeah.
certainly want to
Yeah.
do. And
So this is the legal subject, right?
Yeah, it's
These
kind
are
of
the legal expertise questions.
Yeah.
Right. And then,
your approach is a good one. We're certainly glad to follow up as you've suggested. And if you want to fine-tune this a little further, all the better.
Okay.
and on the conflicts one, you know, I like very much the comments we've got from the public about engendering public trust. And so, you know, so a question might be around how you would engender that trust, you know, given any conflicts that you might have.
Or perceived.
Perceived conflicts that you may have. How would you build that trust and, you know, make this an easy decision for the commission? Something to that effect, I think, would be, I'd be very interested to hear what they have to say.
Commissioner Moore.
Cost as well, right? We're going to have a cost category.
I'm sorry, Mr. Miller.
Go ahead. I had a question for the commission. The case could be made that their specific experience is laid out pretty well in the brief, if you will. Would you like to spend, in comparison, more time in the hypothetical and the cost, the conflict issues, the how would you deal with it, and comparatively less time on the what have you done, perhaps with the exception of, you know, tell us why you'd be well prepared to litigate this case
Right.
in the event that should occur.
Well, I like Commissioner Blanco's suggestion about asking an open-ended question about that's forward-looking. You know, given that you know what our charter is as a commission and the task that we have before us, you know, how, you know, with your wealth of knowledge and experience, you know, what do you see are the challenges ahead? You know, in terms of your expertise in the voting rights, something to that effect. Should give them plenty of opportunity to elaborate on any specific experience or recent case law.
Something that's captured in the experience, but that maybe we still might want to pull out is what role they've played or what they see the role is in these public hearings, because that's something we kind of, I think, want to flesh out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a question, and maybe this is going to be wrapped up around our discussion about costs and scoping a little bit, but, you know, I want to hear how they're going to help keep our expenses down and still give us the expertise that we need, because the budget is really a very real consideration.
I mean, mechanically, for me, as we're drawing the lines and people make comments and such, I would hoping they're going to say, well, you know, if you did that, you're going to have a problem because over here, that's what I want them to tell me.
Right.
And very specific kind of stuff, you know, at the very nitty-gritty level. I mean, that's how I envision their job. I don't know how they envision their job.
But I guess a question for them and for us is, do we see them needing to be at 30 input hearings? Do we see them needing to be at the hearings that are in the regions that have the 4 affected counties for Section 5? Do we, that you could,
And will their will
there's a
change?
whole, that's the scoping question that I think we need to consider.
Oh,
Okay, why don't you go ahead and take that? No need to do that in open hearing. You can go outside the hall for right now.
so maybe along those lines, now that we're sort of, I feel like we're honing in a little bit, that was really helpful. Maybe, I know this is not a lot of time, it's Tuesday and they will be here Thursday, but the census is out. The information about California is publicly available.
This is why, given what you know.
And maybe very specifically ask them to come prepared, having looked at the data for California, to say what our biggest
What our biggest issues
issues
are.
are.
Our base
And-
areas.
Yeah, because we do have, and likewise, instead of being as general as how would they work with us, really come to us with a plan.
Yeah, I mean, we have, everyone knows what the 4 counties are. We know what the population growth is. I mean, all that information's
We
available.
know we have X number of hearings we want to do.
Exactly. So there's a lot of information available to them. So if I were a consultant, I would have a very clear idea before I was bidding on anything exactly how I would be tackling this project. So I would hope they would have that too.
I mean, my only concern is the time frame is really short, and that may be asking a little too much.
You still should have a
but-
framework.
but-
and
Yeah,
then
no, a general
negotiate.
framework,
Yeah.
when presented orally, I think would be fine. I'm not expecting a write-up
Yeah.
at this point. but-
And again, you make the candidate who offers generalized platitudes. We'll see that.
Yeah.
So, but when we communicate with them ahead, haven't we in the past communicated ahead of time with them?
We've asked them to come in an hour early.
An hour early, right? So that, and give them the questions. I think we do need to, if it's that level of precision, we need to give them, the opportunity to prepare. I would say.
Well,
Beyond what we're doing right now.
I mean, ideally,
right.
We'd fax some questions first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
3 or 4 questions, or
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
talk
Yeah,
about,
we could do that.
Interesting.
so they've got the airplane flight and
Really?
everything else to work on it.
So you've done that with staff hiring?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
okay,
We've asked them to come in an hour early. We've given them the questions.
Right.
okay.
And then they had an
So
hour
they
to think about it.
Yeah, they have time to think about it, so you get a presentation that is. And we've seen presentations that have been really quite thorough, and others that have not been thorough.
I like that terminology because I think maybe there's 2 parts to this. One is more presentation and one's interview. So in some part of it is presenting how they would, their work plan for us, presentation about what they see these major issues to be. We could go through that, and that's almost like presentation. And then interview, almost as separate, right? But where they come to us and they sort of present. I don't know.
we
struck me
had
that
a-
was very different than saying an interview. When you said presentation, it's
We
sort of
had an
different.
interview question that was essentially a presentation. So,
Right.
and it was time limited. Please tell us in N minutes X. So that was the way the question was structured. That's why we asked them to come in early, is because we wanted them to have time to think about it.
These were all for positions of generalists, though.
Yeah.
Not for something so specialized. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that. I mean, if we're going to limit our common questions to just a few, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if we want to skip that piece and go straight to more relevant, specific questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had 4 questions, and then the rest of it was interview free form. Anyone could ask anything, so.
So we have some legal that we could work with Kirk on, right? Mr. Miller. And then we have the conflicts questions that I don't know that we need more, that are sort of general. should we have some cost questions that are general, and then maybe then go into some questions for the specific four that we had said we might, or is
On
that,
the
or leave
cost
that
thing,
up to the
I was hoping,
individuals?
I was hoping that we would have a discussion as a group about, what we think we're going to need. And so it's really a scoping and, which will lead to the cost, right? Because they're all making a set of assumptions on how much time this is going to take. And that's based on what they think we're going to need. So there are
Right.
implicit assumptions in here, but I thought it would be useful for this group to try to make that a little more explicit on what we think we're going to need. Now, they may think we need something different, and that's going to be part of the discussion in the interview. But we should have an idea, because we have, everything from halftime to so many hours per month
Well,
to, whatever.
In terms of scoping, because we talked about, we have more conversation to have, we talked about when we actually get back together and start drawing the lines ourselves as a body, will they need to be there? So if we suggest moving this line, they'll be there to tell us, don't do that, or that's okay. I mean, in other words, it's like some of the various proposals have them coming to our input or meetings, our outreach meetings, our line drawing meetings. But there's going to be, as we talked about, a fair amount of time in between those meetings that we're going to be working. Do they need to be there for that, or part of that? And that's part of the scoping to me.
Commissioner Ward?
It's a good question. That's one I had is, my understanding is we were inviting them to come to public meetings, or asking that of VRA. And I was kind of wondering why. So I was hoping we could make a decision on exactly what it is we were expecting out of public hearings and things like that from them, not them tell us what you're going to, more what we expect out of that, because I wasn't clear on that either.
So now it's just, should we go, before we go to the scoping then, should we look at questions we all share that we have of individual applicants? Or leave that up to all of us individually to ask in the interview?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, I'd leave that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd leave it up to
Okay.
each
All
one
right.
of us.
Go, yes, Commissioner.
I was just going to ask, stickler for trying to have a list here.
Yep.
So I have a capacity question, a capacity accessibility question, methodology analytical skills question, a conflicts question, a cost question, and then it seemed like everyone had a general agreement that we wanted a biggest issues facing this commission in regards to Voting Rights Act. Section, I don't know if we limited it to Section 2, Section 5 or not, but
No.
no, okay.
I would.
Biggest issues
Yeah.
facing the
Yeah,
commission
but
then,
they-
and,
they may think
and
so.
how would you
See what
approach
they
it?
say.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So that's 5 open-ended or standard questions at this point.
Sounds good.
That sounds fine.
Yeah.
I mean, and then we can hone in based on either their answers or, again, individual concerns
Yeah, I
that
mean,
come
there's,
up.
certain candidates have certain issues, and
Yeah.
that'll be a whole separate set of questions.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to work with Mr. Miller if he wants my help in kind of putting together
Sure.
a more elegant list, as he would say.
Already very elegant.
So let me be clear. Let's say just in terms of between now and Thursday afternoon, we'll have Janice read back some of our notes, and then when Mr. Miller comes back, we can task him to basically sort of refine some of those and give us a list. Will we then we'll circulate that among the committee members? Are we going public on that in terms of posting?
No, we don't have to do that.
Okay.
We haven't in the past.
Okay, but that was for personnel.
Those are personnel.
Those are
issues,
personnel-
so
those
this
are
is a good
different.
question for Mr. Miller.
So that's the reason I was asking, because we're
mean,
doing
I-
something different here. It's
I personally would be inclined to post them because the public may have an opportunity
to comment.
to comment on the
Okay.
questions.
We've sort of identified sort of 5 or so sort of general open-ended questions. There'll be opportunities to do follow-up and then also do more specific questions. And we're putting it on. We'll have Janice read it back, but we'd like you to sort of refine those and get them on paper to us. And then the question was in terms of public release of those questions. And one question that's come up is, because in the past the commissioners have been involved in personnel interviewing and hiring as opposed to contracting, whether the process needs to be different because of the more public and open nature of contracting.
I think the short answer is that the questions have to be available to the public. That doesn't mean that we have to post them prior to the meeting, but it's a public document that people would have access to. And if you'd like to post it, that's fine, and we collect public comment. It's just not that you're not required to do so ahead of the meeting.
That would not apply to a list of potential questions, correct? If we want to come up, in other words, have a list of potential questions and then refine that and have a final list, and then secondarily, there was talk of being able to fax those early or as quickly as possible to the potential candidates and give them a chance to prepare for those questions. Thus, the need to, or give us no time to post those and receive comment on it.
I hope this isn't putting too fine an edge on it. There's a difference between posting and it being a public document. Anything that goes to the commission is something that a member of the public may request. They're entitled to receive it. But that doesn't create an immediate posting obligation. For example, they could send a Public Records Act request seeking the document, and we would provide it. But that doesn't require us also to post it. But I'm not sure I answered your question in saying that. I'm
If
sorry.
our approach was that we wanted to go ahead and come up with a list, so we have some categories, 5 categories we've identified that we want to ask a standardized question in of all candidates. If we were to have staff compile a list of proposed questions under those headings, and then we wanted to, as a panel, get together and fine-tune that and come up with the finals. And then we would go ahead and want to fax that or send that to the candidates at their earliest opportunity. We would, the appropriate thing to do would be to post that final list. And
yes,
make that available, since that's what we're sending out. Is that correct?
I would recommend just posting the final with the nuance that if somebody wanted to see a copy of the draft that went to the commission, we would provide them with that. It doesn't require us to post it, but it would still be available upon request. I think it'd be a little confusing actually to post a draft and then the final, but the draft becomes available upon request.
Okay. So do we have some agreement on the committee then that that's sort of the process, and that presumably once the document is finalized, that of course goes to the applicants, certainly directly to the applicants, but we'll post copies and provide, and I guess all the commissioners can get copies as well if they want to take a look at the questions. But those would be the questions we would work off of. And obviously we have some flexibility in the interview to actually go beyond them. Okay.
Lots of flexibility.
Yeah. Or to ignore them if we feel.
Can I ask, we talked about a timeline at all for these interviews, or about how long we anticipate taking per?
Not yet.
Let me just report briefly. Gilda Daniels is available, but she would also like to call in. She, notwithstanding the fact that we made it clear in the request for information that of what our schedule was and the desirability, indeed, the expectation that people would be in person here, she also has a conflict and asked if she could call in. And given our earlier discussion, I told her that I thought it would be acceptable to the commission for her to do that.
With the proviso that we'd like to see if we can try to set up a Skype session if possible.
She said she did have that capability, so then the question becomes whether we do.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I know that we do. I don't
Okay.
know if we do, but we do.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to lend my laptop to
Yeah,
the commission.
exactly.
If you don't mind a small.
He's saying no, that we will not have that capability.
Yeah, they don't, but we can. We can do it.
Do you know, can that be set up so that it would be simultaneously on several computers and on a speakerphone?
Skype does not,
We can do conference calls.
Can you do
not with
visuals?
visual.
Not
do
with visual?
No, you can do conference calls, but visual is limited to 2 people.
Well, you can crowd around
But we
one.
could stand in front of a screen. I mean,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Let's not
We
make
can
this
do our
more
own
complicated
choreography.
than we have
Just
to.
saying that's, you know,
Yeah.
it's a weird limitation.
We could try to get a
that's
big,
Skype has.
bring a big monitor in if we
Yeah.
want to do that.
Can I verify with you, Kirk? Is there a procedural rule that would prevent us from doing that beyond just the fact that there's not internet available in this
Right.
room? Is there a procedural problem
No.
with that?
This is not a legal issue. I just, in being complete, there's a different rule if a commissioner were calling in from another area, and we won't go into that, but for an applicant, it's not a problem.
Okay. At last meeting, one of the sergeant at arms had made a statement that there was some rule against, literally against having internet access in these
Yeah,
buildings.
that may
And
be an
my
issue for-
concern is just that that's not allowed.
You're talking about the local rule as opposed to the,
Yeah, and I hope I haven't been in violation of it because I was using my card to access it that.
But
But
that's a rule for legislators, not for us.
was the fact that we got you those cards suggests that,
Yeah.
that, we'll obviously double check that and
yeah, if there's a building rule that bans them, that's one thing, versus the members of the Senate and Assembly not doing that. So,
Fine.
okay.
'cause I've already been violating it
Oh, me
quite
too.
a lot.
Well, apparently you violated more than one last time.
You just can't drink while you're doing it.
I think water, I've been told, is okay, with permission, but that's it. And I think we've been very good about complying with the Senate and Assembly rules on that. Okay. Well, let's talk about, maybe we should talk a little bit about specifics of scheduling.
Yep.
then. How have you had some sense of the timing of when the applicants are available?
Yes. Both East Coast candidates would like to be, I'll say, in the second half of the program.
Makes sense.
I don't believe it makes a difference to the California firms whether they're first or second. And if it does, I'll try and work it out with them.
Is an hour enough? Do you want 90 minutes? There are 4 of them.
Are we going to follow the same process as prior, where we go ahead and conduct an interview and then allot time for discussion of the candidate prior to moving on to the next? From previous experience, we always run over, so maybe we ought to budget accordingly, remembering that we have 4 at this point.
And these are all, and just as a reminder, these are all in open session compared to closed session, which is I think what you did
Yeah.
with the personnel hires.
So I don't think the discussion immediately after would make sense. I don't think that's useful.
I agree.
I think what I'd do is I'd schedule 4 45-minute interviews, maybe 50 minutes, and then 10 minutes to move to the next one. So that gets us done by 7. And then we have as long as we need
To discuss.
to discuss and decide.
So schedule them on the hour, then?
I mean, does
Try
that
to
seem like
limit them
enough
to
time? I don't think we need to
50
belabor
minutes.
this.
My only concern is we've been reminded several times by the public about making ourselves accessible, and if we have the conversation and then the final decision about who we're going to recommend, and all of that's happening at 8:00 at night, I'm a little concerned about that from the point of view of the public. Yeah.
Go ahead. Commissioner Ward.
What decision were you referencing? We're just making a suggestion to the board, right?
Right, but if we're doing that at the very end of the day, it's not a decision, it's not a vote, but we will be, making a recommendation like we always do in the advisory committee. And we've wanted to even have people comment on our recommendations. If we don't come up with that recommendation till late at night, I worry. Although unless we move it, unless the next day's session is such that people have the late that night and morning to post comments or to come to us,
Yeah, but I don't think we're going to be late at night. I mean, if you're talking about 11 o'clock, I would have a concern. But we're talking about 8 o'clock, and 8 o'clock is about as good as you're going to get for the public to have a comment.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't see how you can have that discussion until you've actually heard from all four of them.
Right,
No,
right.
I know. So I'm just bringing up the question that we have had people say that when we go so late, it becomes hard and all of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that concern has come up because we've often, a number of meetings, we've sort of postponed public comment until the end of the day, and we keep
Yeah,
stretching out
we
the
started
end of the day.
9 and it's
Yeah.
now 6:30.
I
That
think
is
if we're,
the end of
if
the
we're-
day.
I
but-
think, and we're giving the public some notice now, and I think on posting the meeting and at the beginning of the meeting, simply, this is our schedule for the day. We understand it will be getting a little bit later, but I think, going 7 to 8 is not overly unreasonable, given the timing of it all.
Yeah, I mean, more members of the public will be available then, actually.
Yeah, so.
It is a meeting that calls for a large lunch.
Within, of course, state-required dollar guidelines. So the public is not concerned about our.
Macaroni and cheese is cheap.
A lot of mac and cheese.
All right, so it sounds like, again, sort of scheduling on the hour
Yeah.
would work.
And I would suggest that this is less of an issue since we'll just have two firms coming in, but I thought I would ask the one not presenting not to be present during the other's presentation and so on.
I think that's, yeah.
We'll try to house them across the street.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
On the questions,
50 minutes?
50 minutes.
Yeah, 50 minutes, basically. Did you want to raise something, Commissioner Ward, in terms of limiting access? Or?
I was just trying to think it through if we have East Coasters who are coming in late and have the availability to watch the stream, but the people who are here are at a disadvantage by being separated. If that
Or they can go watch it.
right.
a
If
cafe
that's
or something.
something that that seems like
If you
that's
just have the
appropriate.
honor code would ask you not to
Yeah.
watch until you're on. I mean,
yeah,
that's,
in talking with them, it sounds like they're actually going to be tied up until the moment their turn comes, but I'll ask them to provide that courtesy to the others.
I mean, I just want to comment that this was the same issue the applicant review panel dealt with interviewing 120 of us,
yeah.
And people got to choose where they went in the sequence, so.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and again, I think it would simply be a request as a courtesy, but they too are members of the public, and I don't think we can limit or require that they cannot watch it, but I think as a courtesy, we could ask them to do so. Okay. All righty.
I was just going to kind of conclude the question formation piece here. We'll follow up as you suggest, and I'll email these back to you. If you want to email comments back, I can try to incorporate them. What we can't do is work really directly with all five beyond receiving your comments, and I'm glad to work with one or two to finish it. That's perhaps the best way.
Right.
Great.
I've volunteered.
Okay, let's do that. And then, to the extent there are conflicting comments, we'll work those out.
Okay. I'd like to have public comment at this moment. Is there any other points that we need to cover in terms of the questions or the process?
You had mentioned earlier you wanted to talk about the scope of the work and the
Yeah, I'm
budget.
sorry. Right.
We haven't discussed
Right,
that
that's
yet. That's the main thing, actually, that I hope you guys will discuss.
Yeah, no, I remembered that. I was wondering if I wanted to maybe get some comment on stuff so far, so it's not all one big hodgepodge of things. Is there would anyone like to have comment, at least at this stage, in terms of what we've covered so far, in terms of the general questions and the interview process itself? Okay, that's fine. Just want to squeeze that in there before we go to the scope of work. Okay. Oh, okay. I have a suggestion to take a short break. Is that okay with commissioners? Maybe again, a 10-minute break, and then we'll resume the scope of work. Okay, so let's be back. I have a little bit after 3, so 3:15. We'll resume. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ed.